over to you in a second, Melinda, so hopefully you'll be able to share your screen. So Melinda's the business partner with Local Land Services, working from North Coast. So Melinda's been working on a pilot project this year in partnership with Greening Australia. The goal was to get 20 landholders signed up by June, covering an area of 500 hectares using the environmental plantings method under the Emissions Reduction Fund. As I mentioned, Melinda presented at the National Carbon Farming Workshop earlier in this year. So I'll now hand over to Melinda and we can check back in and hear how the pilot went. Thanks, Melinda.
Thanks, Rachel. Can everyone see my screen, the PowerPoint presentation?
I can.
Okay, cool.
Looks good.
Look, thanks very much, Rachel, and everyone for listening in and giving me an opportunity to give you an update on the pilot. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands I'm dialing in from today, and that's the Bundjalung people of northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland. And I also would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and anyone on the call today. So the last time, yes, it was May this year when I gave a bit of an overview or outline of the pilot. And at that point in May, I think the pilot had been running for just on 8 weeks. So this gives me an opportunity to tell you, how it went and what were some of the results. I should just acknowledge, while I'm the one talking today, there's a team of people behind the pilot that made it happen. We had the support of Greening Australia and their Biodiverse carbon conservation arm, and there were some other pivotal LLS people involved, being Louise Orr and John Nagel. So really want to acknowledge that it was a team effort. So I'll just briefly recap or give you remind you what was, hang on, okay, that's all skipped. Okay, so an overview of the pilot. So the pilot was to test a new public-private sector partnership between Local Land Services, being a New South Wales statutory body, and the private sector being Greening Australia and their Biodiverse carbon conservation arm. It was acknowledgement that LLS on its own couldn't support its customers to participate in a carbon market without the services of a carbon project developer or aggregator. So really it was about testing whether that kind of partnership accelerated and streamlined and made it easier for landholders to participate in the carbon market. The pilot was also about testing the North Coast landholder appetite for environmental plantings, and particularly more the larger size environmental plantings. We set a minimum hectare size of 20 hectares. Now, typically, there's always demand for smaller planting sizes. It's always out there, but we were really looking for that larger revegetation project. We also wanted to test what were the most effective engagement or communication methods that would attract the interest of our landholders. And we also wanted to better understand the costs, the economies of scale or the savings we might have, but also the capacity of all of our providers to implement what would be sort of like a 500 hectare planting aggregation. So the pilot was limited to the North Coast Local Land Services region initially, and that spans from the New South Wales-Queensland border down to the bottom of Port Macquarie Hastings local government area, and the westernmost LGAs are at the foothills of the Great Dividing Range. Now, the target we had for the pilot was to recruit or secure the interest of at least 20 landholders and 500 hectares by June 30, 2021. So the approach we took, well, it was short and sharp, basically. We ran the pilot for a 17-week period, starting about the 9th of March through to the 30th of June. Local Land Services was able to reassign some of its surplus funds to employ, well, actually reassign an existing local project officer. We also deliberately softly launched the project. We wanted to test quite a few different things that if we had broadcast it more widely, it just wouldn't have helped us understand what were the best engagement methods or ways to get through to our landholders. So it was a soft launch and very targeted. The approach we also took was we used spatial analysis and spatial layers to guide who or the landholders that we would talk to and engage. So we're lucky in New South Wales that Department of Primary Industries have modelled the carbon sequestration yields from the mixed environmental plantings across the whole state. So we had that mapping as a layer that we could overlay with land ownership. We could also overlay it with koala priority habitat restoration areas. We could also overlay that with climate corridors. So we used that spatial analysis to identify those properties and landholders where all of those kind of priorities stacked and overlapped. Now that still left us with about 10,000 potential landholders that would be eligible for a mixed environmental planting. Now for a 17-week project and for one project officer, you know, there was absolutely no way we could, you know, talk to 10,000 people. So what we did was we then identified of that 10,000 odd landholders a subset of customers that we had already engaged in a quite a detailed way. And we sent an email directly to them. So that was the approach we took, because we know that, you know, carbon projects are very expensive. They have high transaction costs. So if we could employ a method or test a method that was really very targeted, then hopefully that would improve, you know, the number of customers going ahead and saying yes to participating. So there was 8 sort of communication and engagement methods that we did test. I've mentioned the primary one was a targeted email to customers that we had previously engaged with. We attended field days and other events. We tracked we posted small articles in our regional newsletter. So there were 8 sort of different sort of communication and engagement methods that we tested. And what we learnt was that the targeted email was absolutely the most effective in stimulating interest. So in that 17-week period, we had 55 landholders that expressed an interest in planting around 711 hectares. Now I should have got the percentage in front of me, but some of those landholders did drop out after that initial phone call. I guess it was a little bit different to what they expected. So yeah, there was a small subset that sort of dropped out after learning a little bit more about it. For those that were still interested after that initial phone call, our project officer, John Nagel, went out and did a site visit. And at the end of that, we had about 28 landholders that were extremely interested and committed in planting around 590 hectares. Now, for the North Coast, we have very small land holdings, and many of them, and a lot of them aren't of a size to run or register a carbon project on their own. We have to go down this aggregation path. So what we've got at the moment is 28 landholders, 590 hectares in what we're calling our first aggregation. And the mean number of accus that aggregation will produce is just over 260,000 accus. If it all goes ahead, the co-benefits that will come from that is that they'll be working on country Aboriginal employment outcomes. We'll see significant water quality improvements because 100 hectares of that 590 hectares is in a local government water catchment. There's going to be amazing connectivity and buffering of existing protected area estate as a result of the aggregation. And at the moment, we've got about 5 or 6 threatened species that will benefit from the planting, and at least 2 threatened ecological communities that we're hoping to recreate and buffer and enhance. So in terms of the most popular planting sizes that our landholders expressed an interest in, 5, 10 and 20 were the most popular. We did get a couple of 50 hectare plantings, and we got the one at 100 hectares. And considering that, we have small landholding sizes, 100 hectares being put forward is absolutely amazing. So the reasons why the landholders put their hand up, look, primarily the number one reason was for biodiversity and for connectivity outcomes, followed by economic, farm income diversification reasons, but also more generally just for sustainable land management. So look, what we identified as being the critical success factors, look, a lot of these aren't, they're sort of no-brainers, but we really felt that doing some spatial analysis of priority areas really helped us to optimise the co-benefits of carbon abatement. It also helped us it supported this really extreme targeted engagement approach. And we absolutely felt that the targeted engagement maximised that landholder interest and uptake. For us, we identified that being able to leverage our existing customer relationships was a really effective and efficient use of resources, particularly when carbon project costs are already high. The ground truthing of sites for those landholders that wanted to proceed after that initial phone call, look, that they were invaluable. It confirmed, it validated the desktop analysis, but more importantly, it built that one-to-one relationship between LLS. Even though we had it already, it just cemented that relationship. Another really important success factor, I think, for going forward is the provision of customised information per property and regular contact is what's going to keep our customers interested. There's look, we can still go down the group sort of workshopping path and, this more generic or open field day. But at the end of the day, most of our farmers or customers are really looking for advice that's tailored to their farm operation and to their farm goals. We also learnt that, look, it really does take specialist skills to be the project officer or to be in this role. And I think we were extremely lucky in that we had John, who's a real veteran in our area. He's worked in the area for 30 odd years. His native vegetation and plant ID skills are, off the scale. But having his experience kind of really expedited, the project being successful. He could just run with it from the very beginning. And he's has great interpersonal and customer service skills. So I think for anyone looking at kind of doing the same thing, I think it's really important to put on the right staff for the project officer role. Where to from here? Look, at the moment, we are maintaining our relationship with the first group of aggregation landholders, and we're still receiving expressions of interest, even though we're not sort of promoting or running the pilot right now. We are absolutely, look, it's reaffirmed for LLS that there is a role for us to play an intermediary between the customer and, the carbon market, but it takes resources. LLS offers a whole heap of other services and functions, so it would stretch. We need additional resources to be able to provide this sort of carbon concierge service and to expand it, to other methods. What we learned from the pilot also is that our customers really value our independent advice. And for the pilot, look, we were very transparent and said that we were partnering with Greening Australia and Biodiverse Carbon Conservation. But we now, for various reasons, have to probably test that carbon service provider market to make sure that we're being able to provide this objective, independent advice. So that's where we're at right now is we're going to go out and ask all of the carbon service providers out there to put forward, a bid to partner with LLS to be one of these providers for this kind of service going forward. We're also looking, what we've realised is that for a lot of the smaller planting sizes, even with all of the rule changes and co-investment, they're still not viable as emissions reduction fund carbon project. So we're looking at what are some of the alternative markets that those properties and sites could participate in. And we're exploring, at the moment, the role of these smaller areas, plantings, to contribute to biodiversity offsets credits as they mature. So that's very early in the exploration stage at the moment. And lastly, look, we're really just wanting, our membership of NRM Regions Australia and this CoP in particular, a community of practice, is really about raising the profile of regional NRM bodies in helping our landholders participate in all different kinds of emerging markets. So we're really looking forward to, helping everyone, raise the profile and the value of regional NRM bodies. And also, look, there's a lot of things happening in this space. There's the New South Wales government, other corporates, they're all exploring natural capital. They're all exploring ways to uplift and transform, restoration and revegetation. So look, we're really just trying to monitor who's doing what and where, and really maintaining a communication with those people so that we're not duplicating and that we're really value adding to, what everyone is doing. So that's all I have. Happy to take questions on the pilot. Thanks very much, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Melinda. That was, really amazing. I've got a few questions, but I'll let everybody else have first chance. So if people just want to raise their hands if they've got a question, or you can put it in the chat if you're waiting. Did anyone have a first question? I think Susan's unmuted. She's got her physical real life hand up. Susan, go for it.
I haven't quite worked Zoom and I don't know how to put my hand up yet.
That's okay. You can put it up physically or in the virtual world.
Melinda, I'm based in South Australia in Eyre Peninsula, and I'm actually just midway through scoping a project that is virtually what you've just presented. The only difference is we're sort of going a step further, and we're targeting the whole thing at one threatened ecological community and the recovery of that community. So it's a little bit more narrower than what you sort of proposed. But virtually otherwise, it's exactly what you've sort of talked about. I'm just looking back, if there was one thing you could change in your approach or your initial design, is there anything that comes to mind that?
I think, look, we had identified as a risk. Look, I think what you probably need to try to avoid is we probably should have tested the carbon service provider market before we started, because while Greening Australia, they've been absolutely awesome and supportive and they offer a great product, we have an obligation as a government agency to make sure that we are, that all of the providers out there have an equitable chance, to partner with us. We were okay to run the pilot with Greening Australia, but in hindsight, perhaps we should have done the procurement and testing the market from the get-go, because we've actually unfortunately had to say to our 28 landholders, bear with us, be patient, we've just got to pause it, but we're committed, we will come back to you. So I'm not sure what your governance or what your NRM body is, whether it's government or, but just that would be the only thing I'd sort of say.
And we're quasi-government in South Australia as well, and we actually have a formalised partnership arrangement with Greening Australia and Nature Conservation, a group of others. So, I mean, it's looking at this stage like we'll go down a similar path with Greening Australia. So it's an interesting point. So
yeah, I think also when you start engaging landholders, you've got to keep the momentum up. You've really got to push it every day. Not them necessarily, but it takes a lot of time to get rid of those friction points and get it to the planting. Like, it's terrible to say that we're in December and there's not a tree planted or anything yet. So it's a really slow burn. And I'm concerned that slow burn, that lengthy time frame, we will have landholders drop off. So for anyone looking at doing the same thing, stay committed and keep it rolling to try to minimise it.
Okay, thank you.
But good luck.
Thanks very much for this question, Susan, and thanks for your response, Melinda. I think Kate Andrews had her hand up first, and then Kate Forrest, I think. Is that right? Kate stood up. Did you put your hands up? Because I think they go up and then you didn't? Oh, okay, that's a bit weird. All right, well, Adrian's got his up, so I'll go to Adrian.
John was ahead of me, actually.
Was he? Oh, sorry. Well, you can badge in on him now.
I was about to say you're right, Adrian, but now that I'm unmuted, I may as well go.
Go for it.
It follows on from the conversation you were just having, the point you made, Melinda, about approaching the market. And I was wondering what your expectation is from the potential project developers. You know, when you do your expression of interest, are you looking for them to come in and say, listen, we're going to pay a certain amount to participate in this activity because they've got access then to, profit? Or are you looking for percentage, or how are you going to judge that?
Yeah, look, we're still working through the criteria, and obviously I've got to take legal and procurement kind of advice, from within our agency. But value for money and them offering some kind of saving or increasing the return to our customers or landholders would be what we would be hopefully looking for. Because we are potentially pre-screening and filtering them, we're actually doing some work on their behalf. So we would be hoping to see some kind of discount from some of their fees and charges. But yeah, look, be happy to share the criteria or the project plan once we finalise it with anyone, in the network. But yeah, still kind of in development.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting space. Some of the work they did in Victoria, and when you talk to the carbon project developers around the aggregation models, they're saying that they're not economically viable for them. They become economically viable when someone like us actually does all that relationship work and all that pre-work and everything. But then we're left still in the position of, so how do we, someone's got to pay for that time, and the landholders aren't necessarily up for paying for it. So who pays for that? I noticed Kate Brunt's just taken herself off. She's probably got some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, what we're provided is a service. All our relationships, 20 years of contacts with landholders, and a lot of work, and it's of value clearly. And how's that factored in to it is yet to be worked out. So.
Yeah, no, it's a brand new space, this whole kind of private public sector kind of partnership. It's not your typical procurement where a government agency is wanting to buy a uniform or stationery supplies or something like that. We're actually not looking to pay these carbon service providers. We're just needing to test the market to have that confidence to say that to our customers that these providers offer the best value service or this kind of product. And until we do that, then we've just got to go. We've just got to do that process, that step. Adrian?
Sorry, Adrian, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So it's pretty good to see. My original question was around that. How can you get away with just choosing one company, and it's not fair for all the others, etc. But we've moved past that, and I'd like to think that moving forwards, the regional NRM bodies won't have to engage carbon service providers in this space for the mixed native and mallee plantings methodology, as the streamlining pilot has been approved, and it should be much easier for farmers to participate in those projects without needing to provide a commission to a carbon service provider. Maybe a little bit of help from the regional NRM.
Yeah, look, I think I'm not as confident for particularly some of our coastal NRM regions like North Coast that we've still got that planting size. We still, that streamlining may not apply so much to our North Coast region or even some of our others. It's got to be looked into, but I suspect for us we've still probably got to go down an aggregation path. And then if we do, I believe that sort of streamlining doesn't apply as much.
No, that's right. The streamlining and, for example, the waiving of the audit fees only applies if the landholder is the project proponent. Yeah, so taking that carbon service provider, the company, out of the picture and just having your relationship with the landholder, they can do their planting project with a much streamlined application, and the CER helping with the reporting processes, but also no audit costs as well. So the smaller area plantings can be much more cost effective for the landholders. At least that's what I've been led to believe. I haven't actually haven't gotten access to the streamlined application page of the website yet.
Yeah, no, that's my understanding too, Adrian. And I think for the landholders that put forward 50 and 100 hectares, during our pilot, that might be better for them with these new rules to go it alone. But we're just got to work out what is that size threshold for a particular site before that streamline thing doesn't apply. But certainly for further west, our regions further west, I think absolutely that new rule change is fantastic.
Maybe, and I can't believe Kate Andrews hasn't jumped in here, but maybe one of the things to try and take it to that next step so that the landholders are actually the proponent is to look at the business models behind that. So using the commercial service provider is one of the models. I've been trying on and off to get a model going in Savannah Burning on Cape York, and haven't succeeded yet in terms of actually getting that collective of landholders to come together where they're actually doing it themselves, and whether it's through a cooperative arrangement or something where they can employ the project coordinator and actually be their own proponent and run it. But it takes that collective of landholders that want to do that.
And look, I'm finding even just recently there's been a big push more towards insetting. Like there's an alliance of local industry and businesses in the North Coast, a subset of the North Coast that is really wanting to establish themselves almost as not an aggregator, but as that body to be carbon neutral, like to facilitate that. So there's a heap of different business models out there, and it's a minefield to know which way you go down, because it can change actually.
Thanks very much for that, Melinda. I have a question. Did anyone else want to jump in? No, I can't see. Has anybody got their hand up waiting? No. I just had a bit of a nuts and bolts question, so I'm sorry if this sounds a bit sort of naive. So at the moment, you've got all your landholders, because they're 28 that are sort of ready to go, so they've kind of confirmed the projects that they want to do, and so they've registered those projects. They haven't gone through any of I think you gave an ACCU estimate, but they haven't actually registered to the projects under the ERM.
No, that's right. So So at the moment, we're working with those 28 landholders and Greening Australia to provide that site-based feasibility or viability statement. So that's obviously something we can't do because when we don't have the skills or the financial license to prepare that kind of work. But yeah, so once those 28 landholders understand, I guess what's in it or what could be in it for them, then that next step will be, if they say yes, to negotiate a carbon access agreement with Greening Australia if they choose to. And then, so there's all of these steps. It's such a long life cycle. But being able to map it out and explain that to people and map it out, I think hasn't been that kind of information beforehand.
Yeah. So in this case, the Greening Australia will be the project developer essentially for those landholders that decide they want to proceed to the next level, but in future you're going to cast the net wider for potential projects. Or in the case of smaller projects, I think the Streamlined Environmental Plantings project is projects under 200 hectares are eligible under that. So just, Adrian's nodding away, to be supported to register independently of a project developer. In the absence of, that kind of very technical knowledge themselves, they can get support through CER to do it. Right, okay. Right, so it sounds like some of them potentially could, some of those smaller ones could go it alone, or they can use the developer that you've sort of handed them over to in this instance.
And that's why, some of the larger, the 50 or the 100 hectares could well go it alone with those new rules. And I think that's the advice we can offer as LLS, but be quite clear with any partnership we have with a carbon service provider that we are providing this, advice. We're not automatically trying to push them into, one provider. Because
I suppose the smaller projects could still register, but they just wouldn't be able to participate in the ERF option. Is that right? Because they're too small? Because you have to have the minimum 2,000. Is that the sort of limiting factor? 2,000 acres?
Pretty much. They wouldn't reach that minimum 2,000. Well,
yeah. It's 200 hectares. 200 the guidelines.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks for clarifying that. So it might have seemed very obvious to other people, but I was just trying to get the steps in my head. Okay, thanks very much for that. Were there other questions after I just passed that through that? I think there's a few comments in the chat. Sorry, I was not reading them, but thanks for people that have put them in. Just a few interesting ideas. So I'll pull all the chat ideas out and post them into our regular sort of shared document so that everybody's got access to those thoughts later on as well. Anyway, well, if no one else has any additional questions, I just thank Melinda so much. Oh, John Gavin's popped his hand up.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in. I think it's a really, really interesting project, Melinda, and I'd love to hear more as it's progressing and as you're working through those issues. I think it'd be great.
Yeah, look, the procurement and testing the market, all of that market sounding work will happen in the next couple of months. So I think, happy to provide updates, to the network about that, because I think it's a really important thing to cover off and be assured that, we don't lose that trust